Perfect. Well, I just want to start off by saying thank you. I'm so excited to be a part of the Pollinator Summit. There's such a great list of presenters, and I'm very humbled to be included in that list. And I really do enjoy the Pollinator Summit every single year. Last year it was really tough not having it, but it happens at that perfect time of year when you've been in hibernation mode in the winter, stuck in the office doing a bunch of paperwork. It starts to warm up a little bit and you get excited. You hear the birds, and spring's just around the corner. And then the Pollinator Summit happens, and you get a chance to you go to this and you get all expired and invigorated by all the really awesome information. You get to see a bunch of familiar faces and network with them, and you haven't seen anybody in a long time. And so it's just a really powerful and emotional boost that gets you ready for the really busy spring. And so to those of you that I normally would corner and harass and overshare, especially during COVID, hello. I wish I could see you. You can see me, but feel free to reach out. I'd love to catch up since we're missing this opportunity. But for those of you that don't know me and this is your first introduction and you're wondering, who in the heck is this guy? Well, I'm super happy that you asked, and I would love to share that information. So who am I? Well, I'm a Wisconsin guy. I grew up in southern Wisconsin. I'm a Bucky Badger through and through. And for those of you Minnesotans that are already got your defenses up, I just want you to know I'm not a Packers fan. I'm actually a Detroit Lions fan. Usually when I tell people that disarms them, because as anyone that's a football fan knows that the Detroit Lions are totally irrelevant every single year. But I just really like Barry Sanders. He's my favorite player growing up. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea of where I'm coming from. But to be a little bit more relevant, I've been in the industry for a little bit over 12 years. On the practitioner side of things, I actually met my beautiful wife here right at the beginning of my career. We are actually cutting buckthorn together, and then that's how that love blossomed into what it is. So as you can see from this picture, we're super nerds. We love plants. This is our date night, making terrariums together. So, we care about this stuff. We're really passionate. This is what we do at work, and then we go home and we nerd out about it too. To really drive that home, we went on our honeymoon to Galena, Illinois, and we thought, hey, what would be really fun? Let's go check out some prairie restorations. So we were cruising around, walking around, hiking around, and we saw this oak tree in the distance, this big, huge, old, ancient oak tree. And so we got all excited and we ran over to it. And I probably have like 10 pictures of this oak tree just by itself. And then we took a picture with it, right? Well, those are the only pictures we took on our honeymoon. So, we're ridiculous people. We enjoy this stuff. We're passionate about it. We love it. We understand the value behind it, and we've really dedicated our lives to it. And then now this beautiful little angel that you can see, her name is Faye. She's joined us. She's 18 months old, maybe getting into the point where she's not so much an angel, a little bit sassy. But I just want to drive home that a big reason why we do the kind of work that we do is we understand that it's not even necessarily for us, it's for our future generations. And once you bring a child into this world, wow, it gets really serious really fast when you understand what the implications are of the kind of work that you're doing. And yeah, my wife and I were fortunate enough. We actually worked together at a place, Landbridge Ecological. It's a small, it's growing. It's a young, growing company, does ecological restoration and design. And it's really about, this place is really fantastic in that it promotes innovation, different perspectives about doing the type of work that we do and doing it the best way that we can. And so this is where we we are investing our time. And this is out of this opportunity is where I want to share some of the work and the things that we've been doing. And so the point of the day, or my next half an hour, is it's going to be a little bit higher level. I mean, it's really not that much time to dig into it, but I do want to talk about conservation or prescribed haying. And really the objective that I want to get across is that I'd love for you to, after this, just say, wow, this is something that I think we could add to the toolbox when we're doing ecological design and restoration. I think it opens a lot of really interesting opportunities and fills a couple of different voids in a couple of different ways. And then again, like just that perspective shift, but like, you know, taking something and then looking at it from a different angle and learning a lot about it. Like that's what I'm trying to do. Just a little bit of a shift to really get the ideas and the excitement flowing for the type of work that we do. Okay, so haying is simple. It is defined as converting plant material into forage, right? So it's mechanical grazing in a way, all right? And also it means money. So who doesn't want to make money? Historically, haying has been all about the bale. So it's the product that you get, and it's the bale. Meaning, what's the nutritional value that's in the material that we're removing, and how do we get as much nutritional value into that bale for whatever purpose, typically for forage, that we're going to do. Another conventional method is we want to use these bales for biomass, co-firing them with a coal plant to make electricity. Like that is something that there is a market that's out there. And then also, I'll talk a little bit more about this, but prairie haying has also been used to reestablish native grasslands for soil loss prevention. Okay, so when you're focused on the bale and you want the forage content to be a certain content, you focus on where the plant is in its life cycle, and you're really looking at that boot stage. That's when it has the highest protein nutritional value. When you're looking at it for biomass, typically it's after maturity. Especially for native landscapes, you want the seed production to happen, and then you go ahead and you harvest that biomass. And then the third thing is the soil stabilization that I mentioned. And so really there's quite a few studies specific, primarily out of Kansas and Kansas State, that after the Dust Bowl, which occurred from certain farming practices and tilling up native grasslands and typically somewhat arid regions, and then there was a drought that caused massive soil erosion. There was studies that they noticed, hey, the native plants, they hold the soil and they're a little bit more resilient, and they can handle arid conditions because that is what they evolved to do. And so back in the 30s and 40s, Kansas State developed a step-by-step process called the hay method that leads you down. You take existing hay fields and it tells you exactly what to do, when to do it, to take that material and transport that seed into a new fresh field so that you can expand the native landscape. So it is, before there was native seed production and seed companies, and that's still an issue, especially for local genotype. I mean, we're in Minnesota, we're really, really fortunate that we have several options, but you go outside of that, it really starts to narrow. Like, here's a really cool option about a way that you can expand native landscapes. Okay, so that's how historically people have looked at haying. And so again, that perspective shift, framing it a little bit differently. Like the work that I've had the pleasure of doing over the last 6 years, I've been working with haying, is that we're not actually looking at the bale, we're looking at the landscape. And we're saying, can we have vegetation control through the use of haying? Can we alter vegetation makeup, diversity, and richness through haying? And can we use it as a burn alternative and remove some thatch? So before I do that, I just want to compare haying to a couple of other already accepted and utilized restoration practices. I think, the first one I don't have a slide for is, well, haying and mowing, what's the difference there? And I feel like that's pretty easy to explain the differences. Mowing, you're not removing the material. Haying, you are removing the material. And the other part of it is that haying, you have a second visit typically when you're going to bale the material that you've cut once it's dry. Okay, so when we look at it from grazing, because haying is mechanical grazing, let's see what the differences are. So grazing can create a mosaic because you've got the dung, you have bedding areas, and you have species preference. So animals are selecting the most delicious, nutritious species that they want to eat. Whereas haying is you're applying that throughout the landscape. Costs are typically going to be higher with grazing because you've got fencing, you have animals, you have animal care, water, sometimes nutrient supplementation, other special needs. Whereas you've got the upfront costs for the haying equipment, but then you have the lower labor costs, and that it's one person on a tractor that cuts it, and they come back and they bale it and they haul the bales. Whereas on the grazing side, how long are the animals going to be out there? That depends on a ton of different factors. You got to figure out. Typically, it could be a week or two, sometimes longer. And then you have the risk of overgrazing. If you miss that timing by just a little bit, you might overgraze and actually have negative ecological impacts compared to when you're haying. You're in and you're out, and you just do what you do. And if maybe there's an area you don't want to apply the haying to, you just don't do the work there. So, but I do think it's important to note that both of these application methods do create a product. You've got the meat or the fiber from the grazing animal, and you've got the bale. Okay, then when we compare it to prescribed fire, and burn, when you burn something, typically the entire thatch layer is removed. Haying reduces the thatch layer. You don't remove all of the material. You get blackened soil with a burn, so you get a quicker warm up, typically in the spring. Haying is less complex. You just have to deal with the rain, whereas prescribed fire can be incredibly complex. It can be dangerous. And if you're in an urban area like I am, it adds so much additional complications because you have not only the weather, but you have smoke mitigation, permitting, employees, certifications, all the equipment that goes into it. There's some really significant costs. Again, haying in this scenario does create a product in the bale. In burning, it doesn't. And then, I pulled a little bit of information from Ann Swengel from a study that she did, where she noticed that there were certain prairie species of butterfly that in a burned area took 3 to 5+ years to recover in a burned area, compared to hayed areas where it was much less. And the prairie specialist butterflies, those were significantly larger populations where they weren't really, they were minimally impacted by utilizing hay. All right, so that gives you the background information. So now let me talk about the fun stuff that you really want to see, which is like, okay, that's great. Let's see how this actually applies and show me something interesting that's going to get my wheels turning. Okay, so let me talk about this first case study. And this is really the one project that was set up in like a research framework. And so this was in Washington County, Minnesota, and it was with South Washington Watershed District, Great River Greening, Steve Tomford, who you heard talk a couple of times, and Mr. Wiley Buck, and then the Xerces Society with Sarah Foltz Jordan, who you also heard a couple of times. So definitely some familiar names here. And what they did, or what we did, was on this restoration site, we split the area into paddocks. Those red lines are pollinator transects that were taken. There were surveys that were done every single month during the growing season. And then we just rotated which paddock was hayed and which one wasn't. We alternated. We did not rotate. So the same paddocks were hayed every single year for 3 years. And the things that were looked at in this study were the effects of the vegetation, the soil nutrients, and pollinators. And so after the first year, Tomford conducted vegetation surveys and observed twice as many floral blooms in the hayed units than the non-hayed units in the spring. And you can see that in this picture. I think it's pretty telling. In year 3, the Xerces Society identified that pollinator diversity increased in May. Otherwise, there were not significant differences. And Great River Greening identified that hayed areas had higher forb to graminoid ratios and higher forb coverage, although surveys were not taken in May after that first year. Also, I should mention that haying occurred in the fall. There was also no significant soil nutrient level changes, okay? So a couple of challenges that I just want to highlight here are, it was really challenging to find a contractor that was willing to hay. And so the study was at the whims of the farmer that was eventually contracted to do the work. That farmer pretty much agreed to do it on his own terms at the end of his season after all his hay fields were taken care of. There just wasn't enough of a monetary incentive. Plus, he was concerned about haying an area that hadn't been worked before because of potential damage to the equipment. And so there was like a little bit of variability there where like the haying didn't necessarily occur at the exact time. It did happen in the fall, September, October time, but it varied a little bit. And then the other thing, staff turnover, this happens, but that did create a little bit of inconsistency with the data collection. And so, I was a part of this. This was like the first one I was a part of, and I got to go out to the site, and you can see those differences, and they are stark. I mean, even that picture doesn't do justice what you could see in front of you. And I thought, wow, this is super cool and really interesting, and I want to do this more. And so when I ended up moving on, I was like, I've got to look for opportunities to try to implement this and learn more. And I had so many questions, and I just wanted to do a bunch of stuff a bunch of different ways. And so that leads us to the second case study, which is this site in Mendota Heights. Again, Great River Greening. So you can see they observed this stuff too, and they were like, wow, this is cool. We need to keep doing this and learning more. So this site, 12-year-old prairie restoration, 25-acre site. We were contracted to hay 2 acres to start with. The objective was to control Canada goldenrod, which was later identified as tall goldenrod. The haying was late season again in October. And just look at this picture. Look at that goldenrod. How many urban restoration sites do we have that eventually over time convert to this? I know we've all seen it. So what an exciting opportunity to try something a little bit different to see, is this a start over situation? Is this an herbicide situation? Or is there something we can do that potentially could alter the scenario? So here we go. Let's give it a try. What happened? This is the next year in June. So you can see significant changes from haying. And let's go back a second. I mean, look at that timing. That is already seeded out goldenrod. I mean, it's senescing, it's on its way out. So kind of interesting that would create a scenario where the C4, the prairie grasses are released like this, right? Just another picture, maybe it's a little bit challenging to see, but I think you see a structural change from the unhayed to the hayed area. And do you see those disturbance indicating species like the black-eyed Susans that are in there? You see some forb components that are a little bit different that you're not necessarily seeing in the abundant numbers that you're seeing in the unhayed area. Well, you take a look even closer. What is going on? So this is the goldenrod in June. I mean, look at that. We were trying to figure out what was going on. I mean, within 3 feet of where we stopped haying, the goldenrod was robust. And then in the hayed unit, it looked like this. So we took a look at this, and so you can see it side by side. That's unhayed compared to hayed. Just a ton of insect damage. And we were able to identify it. These things were all over the place, but it's the goldenrod leaf beetle that hits the goldenrod in the larval stage and in the adult stage. So, well, that was really interesting. I think we all got pretty excited. And so we've been fortunate enough that we've been haying out there now for a number of years, just to try to learn more and to play around with it. So in 2019, we did some additional studies, and, you know, I understand the limitations of what this graph says, okay? But I think it's kind of interesting in the limited scope that it is, that the area that has hayed for 2 years was the richest amount of species. And so this is just a meter square going out there into those units that we had identified. You know, you can see there's some variability across the site, but I mean, there is an upward trend that there is diversity, an increase in diversity when we're haying. You know, I could go on and on about that site because there's a lot of really interesting stuff. I mean, actually, you know, let's just do it, right? So I'm just gonna go back, but like, okay, so this is the area, right? Well, not only did we hay that area in the fall, there was a burn unit that happened on this site at around the same time in the fall. So what an interesting opportunity. We were able to compare the burn area to the hayed area. And there were some really interesting findings there as well. And then there was even a controlled mow unit that was there. And I can tell you that the mowed unit, there wasn't really any discernible difference. In fact, that area was decided that it was going to get a restart. And so it was sprayed out and reseeded. So very fascinating. Okay, a couple of other sites that I'd like to talk about. There was a small site in Newport, Minnesota. It was a little prairie restoration and remnant prairie. It was fall. It was really wet fall. We were trying to get the burn in. It just wasn't happening. And so eventually I wore down our client to a point where they were willing and interested in giving haying an opportunity. So we went in and we hayed the material, we extracted it. It was really wet, so we didn't bale it. We just removed the material. And the following spring, I tell you what, I don't have a picture. I only have anecdotal, like this beautiful story, but it looked beautiful. We saw an increase in blooms. The site looked you know, arguably better than it has in a long time, just from a diversity standpoint. And the client at that point was really ecstatic. So taking somebody that was really dragging their feet about giving this an opportunity to a point where, wow, this site looks the best that it's looked in several years, and we weren't even able to get that burn in. Like, this is really interesting. I also have this other site, and I do have pictures for this. So, but this is in Hastings. It was a 3-year-old restoration. It was predominantly Canada golden rye. I'm sorry, Canada wild rye. You can see it in this picture. You know, there's a little bit of Monarda and there's a little bit of black-eyed Susans here and there. But we wanted to burn that. Obviously, we wanted to burn that. We wanted more diversity, right? Well, anybody that's tried to burn Canada wild rye knows that that's a very challenging species to burn. It's also a really wet site. So we had challenges there, but, you know, we were able to get a little bit of haying in there just to see how that would impact the site. And you can see where we hayed and where we didn't. Isn't that interesting? So that again was a fall haying. So really, there are some overall challenges. I'm sure for those of you that are way smarter than I am, and you're looking at what I'm presenting to you, you're saying there's so many holes in these studies and in this information, and you're naysaying it. Yeah, totally. I'm coming from a practitioner standpoint. There was only one of those situations that was from a study standpoint. All of the other ones are the objectives for the project are not to figure out what haying does. It's to get to certain diversity specs or to do just increase the function of the landscape. And we're trying this out in certain situations where the certain circumstances line up where we're able to try this out. So yeah, totally, I agree. You know, what would be really awesome is if somebody looked at this information and said, wow, that's interesting. We should do a study on that to see if we can replicate it, if there's something else going on. Maybe you already know. And if you want to share with me, I would love to learn your theories on why we late season hayed Canada goldenrod or tall goldenrod, and that created a scenario where the insect just devoured it, but didn't go outside of the hayed unit, which has been replicated a couple of years now. So yeah, absolutely. Let's get some more data. Let's play around with this. Here's the other thing, timing. We have timing information for the bale, right? When do you cut the material for the bale? When when do you cut it for the seed so that we can spread it? But what about what's left, right? What about the remaining thing? I would assume, and a couple of people mentioned this previously, but I would assume if I'm gonna want to do it for vegetation control, that I'm gonna hay that goldenrod in this example when it's flowering, when it's just about to flower. But when it's all of its energy is focused on reproduction, I'm gonna hit it at that point because I want to demoralize it, right? So why is it that we hayed so late in the season that it had the impact that it did, right? I also think it would be really interesting. What if we burned a site and then we hayed it right after that to mimic large grazing herds? That's what Native Americans did. They would go and they would burn an area to attract large herbivores so that it was easier to hunt them. Like, what if we did that and we double hit an area? Nobody wants to pay for that. Nobody wants to pay for that. And I don't blame them. But a study, if you can get a grant or something like that and just play around with that and see, wow, what does this do? What does this do to this landscape? I think that would be really fascinating. And and then I just timing for different species throughout the year. I think that there's a lot of options there. I mean, because we've got a person that's manually mowing, I think you can mimic the mosaic in some situations where you can target maybe certain species or certain areas of the topography or something like that to maybe make it a little bit shorter structure. Maybe you want to increase the cool season species, which is definitely another effect that we saw from late season haying. And Tomford noted that in that study of the twice as many blooms and the pollinator species. And oh, by the way, queen bees, when do they come out of hibernation in their nesting? In the spring. Well, they need some forage. So maybe this is an opportunity to do that. And also knowing that it has less of a negative impact on pollinator habitat or pollinator populations at the same time in urban areas where the landscape is so segregated, and to have a crew mobilized to go out and burn half of a site so that you can have refugia is not cost effective. Well, can I just hay part of it? I mean, I think there's a niche there, and I think that's something that we could take advantage of. And then the last challenge I want to mention is the markets. So I'm at markets for the bales, market for doing haying as an ecological tool. I think that there's challenges here. I have to sell somebody on the fact that, hey, I think you should hay. I think you should do it. I think it's really interesting. What's it gonna do? I don't know. I got some ideas. I've got some facts and some pictures I can show you, and I think it's gonna work out great. But there's not a, yeah, there's, it's really interesting. So, I mean, obviously I know a little bit more than that, and I've been able to convince some people. So, but that's the point, is that there's a lot more potential out there, and I think it can be a lot more scientific and precise and surgical. And so I think that there's huge opportunities there. And not to mention that, I was focusing on the landscape. If we can double market and have the prairie bales, be worth something other than animal bedding for goats, I think that I think there's huge potential there, that you get to recover a lot of those costs. So let's talk about the potential, right? So after all, like the last 6 years, I can tell you that haying, prescribed haying, conservation haying, whatever you want to call it, it is a vegetation control mechanism that is effective, that we can use. It does alter landscape makeup, diversity, and richness. It does remove thatch. Thus, it allows us, especially during climate change, when burn seasons are crazier than ever, and especially the fall season. It's like, we got a couple burns in last fall, but before that, it's been a couple years for my organization where we've been able to do that. Well, hey, let's do this. Let's at least get some thatch removal in there and increase our floral diversity in the meantime, before we can, and then we eventually can get a burn in. It allows us to do something. Not to mention the urban sites, right, that are really challenging. It's also a seed source. So, I get excited about this because in Minnesota, we have local genotype seed, but as we consider going into other areas of the country, that seed source isn't there. And it's incredibly challenging, maybe frustrating, to bring in a non-local genotype seed when maybe there's a remnant patch on a farmer's buffer strip or CRP field or something like that, where we could pull from there and expand. I think there's huge potential there. The secondary markets, which I already mentioned, but it's, you get paid for the work, plus you get paid for the bale. We know that there's plentiful equipment and skilled workers, people that know way more about this stuff than I do, on how to hay, when to hay, the best time to hay. Now, do they know the prairie stuff and the native species and all that kind of stuff? Absolutely not. But if we could get enough information, we have the workforce and the tools in place to implement a large scale impact. Anything we can do to kind of get into that agricultural side of things could lead to significant impacts to advance our ecological restoration goals. So huge potential there. And then, of course, the more prairie hay you have, the more money you have, the more prairies you have. And isn't that what we all want anyways? So let's make that hay. So that being said, does anybody have any questions?
Hi, Sean. I'm going to hay my prairie.
You should.
So we have a couple of questions here. What about the impact to insects that overwinter in plant stem material? And let's see, there's a second part of this. What about harvesting at a higher cut, leaving a foot stem? Will that help? Or is there different kinds of haying equipment?
No, that's a great question. So yeah, we cut at a higher level. So 6 to 12 inches is where we cut at. And no, there's not specialty haying equipment that we had for that. We had to figure out how to do that. I'll share a story too. So I was giving a presentation similar to this down in Iowa, and there was a farmer that was there, and he was talking about that he had a thistle problem. Very surprising, right? A farmer with a thistle problem. And what he said, that he's been trying to get rid of it for the longest time. What he found to be the most effective method was to cut it at about between 6 to 12 inches. And then during right when it's budding, and then you would remove the material, and that it would dry. He described it as like the stem would dry out, and he's like, and I would do that for 2 to 3 years, and the colony would disappear. And so I found that incredibly fascinating because in essence, that's what you're doing. You're haying. Definitely not a market for that cut material, but yeah, I think that height is really important. Also remembering it's mechanical grazing. We want to mimic native grazers as best as possible. And we know that bison don't graze all the way down to the bottom. When you're not worried about the bale. So like the reason that hay equipment is so low to the ground, 2 to 3 inches, is because you want as much of that material as possible because you're focused on the bale. I want the bale, I want the biomass, I want all that. That's not what we're worried about, right? We're worried about the plant. So yep, we go a little bit higher. I'd absolutely recommend that. That's a great question.
All right, I've got another one here. I've observed with my animals, they prefer the prairie species. They ate up all the big blue stem clumps in the pasture first. Do you want to comment on that?
What kind of animals?
It doesn't say.
This is how I'll comment for that. If people have observed things similar to this, I would be so fascinated and interested in hearing from you. Or if you have questions too, reach out and we can talk about it in any way, shape, or form. But I'm just, like I said at the beginning, I'm really passionate about this stuff. I'm talking about it anyways at home with my wife. We're nerding out really hard. And it would be really great to have a fresh perspective because as you can imagine, after like 12 years, we're just like going in a circle and just getting each other hyped up. So yeah, please break it up, keep it fresh, and I'd love to learn more. So.
Okay, I've got 2 more for you. And these have been asked in other presentations as well, but there's a lot of talk about brome. So what is that effective for brome control? Is haying effective for brome?
I have not tried it for brome. I'd be interested in doing it. I mean, it would be a part of a stepped process, right? Where you would need to get the native seed in there. So, I mean, I'm not sure.
Okay. Can you tell us what you do with the goldenrod material after you hay it?
Yeah, we sell it for typically it's been sold for goat bedding. And I don't know if you saw in that, but those bales are we have this Italian tractor for used on the Alps. And so it's like a little 2-foot by 3-foot bale. They're just the cutest little thing. So yeah, we've sold those for goats. And then we've also used them even for people have used them for straw bale gardening in urban settings because I mean, the goldenrod's not going to go anywhere at that point. And that's been really successful. I've used it for my chickens for bedding. And yeah, that's what we've been able to do so far.
Great.
Oh, I should mention too. So in some of those settings, we're going through and we're haying and there's invasive species. And we obviously, we don't want to be spreading invasive species. And so we actually, the system we've come up with is we just tip the bale as we're baling it. We have it marked off where they are. We tip them a different way. And then we go ahead and we just compost those on site. So we have not been spreading invasive species.
Okay. A disclaimer.
Exactly.
I think that's all we got, but
Okay.
Sean, this was especially helpful to me.
Excellent.
And so I appreciate it. And I hope you'll come back next year. We're gonna move on to our next speaker here in a minute. Do you have any closing remarks?
Nope, just thank you again. Really humbled to be a part of this. And if anybody wants to reach out,